unacceptable. And this is why Islamically, our ahkam, our regulations, our laws pertaining to children, even though having children outside of wedlock is Islamically a munkar, a sin, in spite of that, a man still has an obligation to their biological children because they didn't get here by themselves, right? So with the exception of Adam and Eve, who had no parents, with the exception of Jesus Christ, who only had a mother, not a father, with the exception of in vitro fertilization, the vast majority of human beings, we got here because somebody was fucking and somebody got pregnant. That's just the reality, right? So when that happens, those children are owed something. Those children are owed a father and a mother. Those children are owed a male parent and a female parent because they didn't ask to be here, right? So because they didn't ask to be here, their fathers, their biological fathers haven't, again, this is from the Islamic paradigm, men have an Islamic mandate. Don't matter whether you're Muslim or not. You have an Islamic mandate to be there for your children. And this goes without exception, right? I don't care if you're locked up. Your children have a right to know who you are. Your children have a right to have a relationship with you. You know what I'm saying? And that, if that were pressed more, if that were stressed more, you would see a decline of, quote unquote, the okayness of bastardization, having children out of wedlock and stuff like that. Because men are free to do a lot of things. Let's just be real. We're free to impregnate someone and then just step off. That's not okay. That's not a flex. That should not be an acceptable precedent in anyone's culture, but particularly ours. That should never be okay. Like, oh, I'm gonna just knock shorty up, dust her off, and I'm gonna keep it pushing. The fact that that's acceptable, that's the reason how and why so many women don't mind being single mothers. Because they're like, oh, that nigga not gonna be there anyway. Yeah. So it goes back to the men getting our shit together. This is why Allah says in the Quran, الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men are responsible for women. We have to pick up the mantle and be more responsible for our communities and what happens in our communities. Like, for example, one of the best movies, no, not even one of, the best movie to watch and study in terms of this particular subject is the film Claudine, starring Diane Carroll and James Earl Jones. It takes place in the 1970s with the whole welfare system. And because, you know, back in the days, if a woman had a man in the house that wasn't her relative or wasn't her son, welfare would cut off her benefits. So it literally forced her to keep a man out the crib so that she could get her benefits. And that became a cultural precedent. And a lot of us grew up under those circumstances.
Absolutely.
A lot of us know people or have fathers or mothers who grew up under those circumstances.
And it was the destruction of the black family. And speaking of, we always think about...
But during slavery,
yeah,
the vast majority of people who were enslaved, they literally got married. That's where we get the whole jump the broom concept. The whole jump in the broom concept was actually an ancient African marital tradition that got remixed as a result of the American slavery experience.
Speaking of that, right? So we always talk about community and how we build up the community, how we want men to continuously be the protectors, the providers.
But we never have convos like this.
Yeah. But Rabbi, I want you to speak to something. I want you to talk a little bit more about the community that you live in, right? Because your community is like really a community like old school, right?
Real tight-knit.
Yeah, tight-knit, where everybody knows each other. You go to the same, you worship at the same synagogues, you shop at the same grocery stores, you know, your kids go to school together. Talk about a little bit about your community. You don't have to name it if you don't want to. And just how it was created and how it's able to thrive and sustain even in 2024, where it seems like those ideals of community don't really exist too much in most places, right?
Interesting question. Yeah. So I live in like the Muncie area, Muncie, New York, and it's big, you know, Orthodox, ultra Orthodox, however you want to put it. But there's also, you know, less observant Jewish people that live there as well. There's also, you know, black families, Hispanic families. But yeah, there's these pockets of community where, in my neighborhood alone, there's I think 8 or 9 places to go in daven, and on Shabbos, on Sabbath, you have to walk. So there's a lot of, even within this pocket, you have different places that you can, but everybody kind of knows each other or is familiar with or what have you, and there's a big support system with that. I know one of the things they say is one of the biggest detriments to like the black economy was integration.
Yeah.
Was putting the dollars out and never having anything coming back in. And so the Jewish communities, a lot of it is we help each other. We help each other. Businesses grow, and it's not just that we go to each other for business, but we'll also talk to each other when we have a problem. Hey, I pay for this, da 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 da, and we have laws, coming from the Torah and extended, as I was discussing earlier, that discuss our economy and business law and all these kind of things. We have our own court systems that you can take another Jewish person to a rabbinical court to discuss some kind of business matter that's taking place. We have these things in place that we have our own infrastructure because we've had to have a mobile infrastructure for 2,000 years. So since the Romans basically exiled us from Judea, we had to have this mobile system of what became known as Judaism. The people from Judea, there's a friend of mine, Rudy Rothman, he talks about it as Judaism being this suitcase where we took our indigenous culture and we put it in a suitcase, and that's called the Talmud, basically. That teaches us exactly how we're supposed to navigate all facets of regular life as well as religious life, that it's all one way of being, and it's all found in our studies, you know what I mean? So our court system, everything is already kind of mapped out, and because we knew from that point it was going to be we're going to be on the road for a while. And we have been, thank God. I mean, we're back in Eretz Yisrael, but not entirely. We're not there the way we want to be. We don't have a religious, court system or anything like that. The government is not, Jewish in style. I mean, it resembles it in some ways, but not in the ways that are most important to us. So even in this time, the rest of the Jewish communities, we all still kind of have these court systems in place.
And so when you talk about court systems, right, and government, something that just came to my mind, right, and correct me if I'm wrong, I've never really seen a group of Jewish people really discuss politics or, really get behind a certain candidate or argue about Trump and Biden. It seems like you guys have developed an infrastructure, right, where regardless of who the president is, or who the politician is, it doesn't affect you that much, right? Whereas in the black community, all we ever do is argue for the last 100 years, who's going to help the black people? Who's going to do this for us? We get behind this candidate. We don't believe in this candidate. We hate this candidate. We don't think politics works. We don't want to vote. Now we're going to vote. But it seems like you guys stay steady throughout it all. Talk to me a little bit about how politics is viewed in your community and the Jewish community as a whole.
So in general, Jews very much engage in politics,
Okay.
but we're not really supposed to. It's discussed it's called Pirkei Avot, which is the ethics of our fathers, like an ethical work written almost 2,000 years ago by the person who compiled the oral law, wrote it down as the Romans were basically getting rid of the infrastructure in Israel. The Yehuda HaNasi decided to write down all the oral tradition. And one of those is an entire section on just the ethical way of life. And one of those things is to stay away from politics, stay away from politicians, and also stay away from politics. You can't really trust politicians, and you don't want to get wrapped up in roped up into politics. You can't. So one of the things I think that's different when you mention, black people engaging in politics and Jewish people engaging in politics is, I think a lot of people have tried to get the black vote by basically trying to fight over who can offer the black community the most.
By hook or by crook.
Yeah, exactly. And so
only an election year.
More crook than hook.
Yeah. And so with the Jewish community, we've known just historically that it won't matter. And the only way to actually have any kind of influence that it can help us in any way, shape, or form is to create influence. Is to have some kind of thing.
Message.
So, yeah. Well, so
if you don't have business ownership and property ownership, who you vote for does not matter. It just doesn't. In my personal view, just from the Muslim side, I have a deep distrust for any Muslim religio leader or personality who is in the political realm who does not advocate for three things for Muslims. If they don't advocate for business ownership, property ownership, gun ownership, I don't take what they have to say seriously. Literally those three things. Not necessarily in any particular order, but if they're not advocating for those three things, I make it my personal business to not take what they have to say seriously. Because especially as per these United States, those three things are where the real power is at. Business ownership, property ownership, gun ownership. That's where the real power is at.
So let me ask you a question from someone who sounds like lives in a self-sustaining community. Do you think we should put as much validity into politicians and helping us as much as we do? Because a lot of us, and especially in the black community, it seems like we're looking for a savior, right? We're looking for somebody that's going to come in.
A political messiah.
Yeah, political messiah. Just save us. All our problems for the last 200 years in America are going to go away and everything, and we're going to be equal, and we're going to have everything we should have ever had. It seems like the Jewish community is more like, you know what, we've been oppressed, but we're going to figure this out on our own. We're not looking for a political messiah.
It's complicated because one of the differences between, Jewish community and the black community is the black community as it exists here in America, it's a few hundred years young. You know what I mean? Even though descending from Africa and that obviously being the oldest of all, but this being just in America, we're dealing with like a short time span here, especially when you consider how much shorter it's been post-slavery. And it's even shorter than that. Then also all the systemic things, some of the systemic, things that have been put in place that have, contributed to black oppression have like slowly been removed. That I think ultimately the best thing is a politician who will do whatever they can to remove any kind of blockages, like we were talking earlier about. Is it an advantage or is it removing the things that create disadvantage? So I think ultimately, over a longer span, that's what's beneficial. Is anybody who has like a quick fix it, politically speaking, probably not going to help so much. It's whoever can remove the blockages and truly create a space that will allow black communities or any community to thrive. That's probably the most important. The problem is because it's such a small window that we're dealing with, it's not going to be felt immediately. And there's been so much detriment in the past that it feels like there should be sort of a repair, not just a move out of the way. And so when you look at the Jewish community, 1,000 years ago, not even, throughout, I would say, the Jewish time in Europe, it was only a couple hundred years ago that there was even a discussion on giving Jewish people rights in Europe, in these European countries. It wasn't until like the rise of nationalism in the 1800s that there was even a discussion on who should have, should Jews be considered, should they have citizenship? Been living there for over 1,000 years, or two almost, should they have citizenship? That just became a discussion. So you had Jews that we talked about last time were put in these positions to be money handling, meaning they taxed people and then gave the tax to the church or to the government or to the crown, whatever it was. But you had like Aaron of Lincoln, I think I've even mentioned him, and he's just an example that lived in the Jewish quarter, meaning he lived in a tiny box, yet had more wealth than anybody could imagine. And he was funding castles being built, he was funding wars, he was doing all of these things, but he didn't really have any autonomy over his own money or freedom of anything because he was under the thumb. But over time, having the success and having any kind of money was able to, the reason whether Jews should have citizenship only became part of the conversation because somebody with enough, influence said this needs to be really discussed. And so somebody said, okay, let's take it into consideration because I appreciate what this person has to say.
Like that old saying, whoever has the gold makes the rules.